Thanks so much, Julie. Really appreciate your work and your support and the efforts of the Public Policy Forum and your team to help us. I'm just going to advance to this point. I really want to pick it up where you left off with respect to the tech sector. I do, however, want to underscore that as important as the tech sector is in terms of high growth, we really need not to ignore all the other sectors. And this is one of my sort of recurrent themes, even though I'm going to focus on tech. And I say this as someone who grew up in a GM town, and for years we watched investments, for example, in the auto sector based on, you know, we have to save those auto worker jobs because for every auto worker job we save, we save 6 or 7 other jobs, that notion of the multiplier effect. Well, I would just present to you all that if we applied the same argument to personal support workers, or particularly to childcare workers, or to teachers who are helping with schooling our children in these circumstances, given the crushing burden of unpaid work on women, investments in a single childcare worker, I would argue, probably produce multiplier effects in terms of allowing women to get back to work that are not taken into account when we look at where we should be investing our money. But tech, without question, key to our recovery, key to growth. And I've been working for 30 years on this issue, and we've learned a lot about what doesn't work. What doesn't work are good intentions and rainbow posters, because as Julie mentioned, there are fewer women today in computer science and marginally more in engineering than when I started. And I really don't want to see us coming back, or you coming back, I'm too old, 30 years from now, and saying we had some really good ideas back in 2020, but somehow the needle hasn't moved. So we do know that part of what contributes to the gender pay gap is occupational segregation. We know the underrepresentation of women, particularly in technology and engineering roles, plays a part. We know that we have to invest in those areas, and we have to have intentional strategies. You know, as I said, the More Than Just Numbers report is 30 years old. Great strategy, no accountability, and frankly did not use the levers that were available to actually drive change. And that's really something I think we have to all commit to. I also have to mention that STEM has become short form for science, technology, engineering, and math. There are lots of women in science. They earn less than women than people working in the social sciences. So lumping together science with technology, engineering, and math actually creates some real distortions in our understanding of where the problems lie and what the issues are. And increasingly, while we need to focus on, as I said, increasing the representation of women, we also have to reframe how we think about tech careers and consider alternative pathways. And I'll just note that if you look at women who lead the biggest tech companies in the US, most of them are not computer scientists or engineers. There are alternative pathways. We know that in artificial intelligence, for example, big issues around project management, implementation, and so on that don't require computer science or engineering degrees. And so one of the things we're really focused on, particularly at the Future Skills Center, is this notion of really granular analysis of what we mean by digital skills and making sure that we've got strategies to address basic digital literacy, which everybody needs. We're investing in programs that produce hybrids who understand the use of technology, but also how to apply it, as well as in the high-end deep tech skills. And I really stress the importance of this second layer, because think about it. We have had the technology to support online learning, online healthcare, online government services for more than 30 years. Took COVID to push organizations to transform over a weekend. Why? Because the issues fundamentally around the adoption of technology and innovation are not the availability of the technology. It's the organizational processes, the human behavior, the incentives, the policies, and so on. And this is not just true of the ICT sector, it's true of green tech, it's true of agribusiness. We have to really break this notion that all we're focused on is making technology and ignoring the application of technology to actually do things differently. The COVID has also both increased the opportunities for technology-driven change, but increased our dependence on those technologies and therefore the acuity of the digital divide. And the digital divide is not just access to broadband, although that is critically important, and we were thrilled to see more commitments in the speech from the throne. It also has to do with economic access. So even a city like Toronto, if you look at the geographic distribution of poverty, of COVID, and of lack of access to broadband, they almost exactly intersect. There are many people living in the city of Toronto who do not have access to broadband technology, not because there isn't some there, but they can't afford it or they don't have the skills needed to access it. So again, we have to really think about this in a sophisticated, multi-layered way and take into account those intersectionalities that both Rachel and Julie mentioned. I have to say a few words about women entrepreneurs because we know that SMEs are the drivers of job creation in Canada. And it's critically important to recognize that women entrepreneurs are actually one of the fastest growing segments of that job creation, but they're smaller. They're less likely to be incorporated. They're more likely to be in the sectors most affected by COVID. And therefore, the COVID impacts are far more intense when it comes to women entrepreneurs. Yet many of the supports that have been designed, back to Rachel's third point in her talk, many of the supports that have been designed for male-dominated, technology-oriented, small, medium enterprises with employees. And as a result, we're leaving many women entrepreneurs behind, but we're also leaving Indigenous entrepreneurs, Black entrepreneurs, and others who are less likely to be incorporated, to be in tech, and to be high growth. And I don't want to overemphasize this other than to say the smallest businesses are the hardest hit. And it's like we're allowing the seedlings to get wiped out. Our future depends on these investments. And so the supports for women entrepreneurs are absolutely critical. And there's lots about those in the report. But the women entrepreneurship strategy of the federal government, which is investing $5 billion to double the number of women businesses by 2025, has to stay front and center because of the importance to the economy. We also highlight in the report, among many other strategies, procurement as a strategic lever. So when we're talking about doing gender and diversity analysis of government programs, follow the money. It's one thing to invest $5 billion in women's businesses. It's another thing to take a hard, cold look at where the money from the regional development agencies, the research and innovation organizations, and the other economic development drivers in government are going, and that's critically important as well. Follow the money. So, just in concluding, from our perspective, innovation is not just about tech, it's about doing things differently. And we need to apply an innovation lens to all of our new strategies, whether we're talking about skills development, whether we're talking about addressing fundamental problems like inequality and healthcare, whether we're talking about increasing access. What we know about innovation and driving change needs to be brought to bear on these things. And we make a number of recommendations in the report, which hopefully many of you will have a look at, which are not different than recommendations that have been made by others. But the key here is a systemic approach that looks at where the problem lies. And there are no simple solutions to complex problems. So when we think about where the problem comes from, it comes from societal barriers, stereotypes, structural inequality. It comes from organizational practices. Julie mentioned, for example, the underrepresentation of women and others in the corporate sector on boards, and Sabine will talk more about this. But when you have some corporations that have 40% women on boards, and you have others that have zero, the argument that there are none simply makes no sense. The reality is some are just not trying hard enough. We call those the corporate zeros. And at the end of the day, all this comes down to individual choices. And we have to really enable and empower individuals to do the right thing. It's not just a women's issue. We have to depend on allies and people in positions of power to also push this agenda. Thank you very much.